Hey, you think you are in control right now. You think the decisions you make, the way you move through your day, the way you respond to the things that happen to you, you think that is you making a choice. It is not. There is a version of you that runs on autopilot, a version that gets triggered before the thought even forms in your mind, that flinches before your brain catches up, that moves every single day, not from any real intention, but from invisible wiring that was installed deep inside you long before you were old enough to question any of it. And the really terrifying part is that you cannot see it happening. That is the whole design of it. And the world told you that this was okay. More than okay. It told you it was actually healthy. It told you to feel everything, express everything, let it all out, be real, be raw, be open. The louder your emotional world, the more emotionally intelligent they said you were. But here is what nobody ever tells you. If emotional intelligence is so powerful, then why do the most expressive people keep losing? Why do the most reactive people keep getting outmaneuvered by life and by others? Why does the person who never flinches, never rushes, never shows you their hand, why does that person almost always win in the end? Because what the world sold you as emotional intelligence is actually just emotional performance. And emotional performance is the single most dangerous thing you can do in a world that is full of people who know how to read you. Every time you react, truly react, you hand someone a blueprint of your mind. You show them your triggers. You show them your deepest fears. You show them exactly where to push. And some people, whether they are doing it consciously or not, will use that blueprint to move you exactly where they want you to go. But here's the truth that changes everything. The most powerful emotional state is not openness. It is not vulnerability. It is not even empathy in the way that most people practice it. It is governance, total, precise, internal governance of what you feel when you show it and what it costs you. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. The philosophers who shaped the modern world understood this. The generals, the strategists, the architects of influence throughout all of history, they all understood one thing that the average person still has not figured out. Your emotion is either your weapon or your weakness. There is no middle ground. Today, I'm going to give you 7 mental upgrades taken from the deepest principles of cold intelligence that will change how your mind operates under pressure, under manipulation, and under the weight of your own inner world. You are not going to lose emotion. You are going to gain authority over it. Number 1, shrink the spike, expand the mind. Every single time you lose your composure, even just slightly, you get dumber. Not permanently, but in that exact window, the cognitive gap between you and someone who is calm is measurable, real, and significant. The neuroscience is brutal about this. When your emotional system fires hard, when something hits that nerve, when the spike comes, the rational part of your brain does not just slow down. It gets physically crowded out. Your resources get redirected. The thinking mind gets rationed, and the reactive mind, the ancient survival wired part, takes over completely. That is not weakness. That is just how the machine was built. But here is the thing about machines. They can be reconfigured. Most people live with what I call wide amplitude emotional wiring. Big triggers, tall spikes, long recovery times. Something happens. The wave comes. It is enormous. It sweeps everything off the table. And then they spend the next hour or the next day or even the next week cleaning up what the wave destroyed. Emotional compression is the deliberate, systematic training of narrow amplitude. The wave still comes. You still feel it. But the height of it, the spread of it, shrinks. And inside that compression is something extraordinary. Headroom, mental space, cognitive capacity that the spike used to consume all by itself. Here is how to actually build this. The mistake almost everyone makes is trying to practice compression when the spike is already massive. That is like learning to swim by being thrown into the ocean in a storm. You build this in the calm water first. Start hunting micro irritations. The small stuff, the thing that slightly annoys you, the minor frustration, the tiny impatience, every single one of those is a training rep. When that small spike arrives, pause. Not a dramatic freeze, just a breath, a single beat of space between the feeling and the response. That beat is not nothing. That beat is everything. In that 1 second, your prefrontal cortex can re-enter the frame. Your thinking mind gets back online. And instead of the spike deciding what happens next, you decide. Do this 50 times in small moments, and something inside you restructures. When the bigger moment comes, and it will come, Your nervous system already has the groove. The pause is already wired. The spike still arrives, but it finds a system that knows what to do with it. Here is the real shift. Composure is not the absence of feeling. It is the mastery of amplitude. The most composed people in history were not emotionally flat. They were emotionally enormous internally. They felt deeply. They simply refused to let the depth of the feeling determine the size of the reaction. Machiavelli once said, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves." One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. The fox part, the part that reads traps, requires a calm eye. A calm eye requires a compressed nervous system. You cannot see clearly through a spike. Less emotional noise equals more processing power. Start small, build the groove, own your amplitude. Number 2, cognitive decoupling. Let me show you something your brain does every single moment of every single day without asking your permission. Something happens, anything at all. A look someone gives you, a silence that lasts too long, an unexpected outcome, a door that closes, a word said at the wrong angle. And before that thing has even fully landed, before the data has even finished arriving, your brain has already written the story, already assigned the meaning, already decided what it says about you, about them, about the world, about your future. This happens in milliseconds. And by the time your conscious mind catches up, the story feels like fact. This is not emotional intelligence. This is emotional autocomplete. Your brain takes incomplete data and fills the gaps with your history, with your wounds, with your fears, with every previous moment that felt similar to this one. And then it hands you the completed story as if it found it, not built it. The trap is invisible because the story always feels true, especially when it is negative, especially when it confirms something you already quietly believe about yourself or the world. Cognitive decoupling is the practice of breaking that automation manually, deliberately, every single time. The principle is simple. The event and the interpretation are two entirely separate things. The event has coordinates. It happened at this time in this place with these observable facts. The interpretation is a construction, your construction. And like any construction, you can choose not to build it until you have better materials. When something happens that activates your emotional system, stop at the fact, just the fact. What literally observably occurred, not what it means, not what it says, not what it implies, just what happened in the most stripped down, neutral language you can use. Once you have the fact, do not rush to interpretation. Instead, ask what other explanations could exist for this exact same fact. Not to make yourself feel better, not to avoid difficult truths, but to stay accurate. Because your first interpretation, the one your brain auto-generates, is rarely the most accurate. It is the fastest. Fast and accurate are not the same thing, not even close. The second question you train yourself to ask is this: what variables are actually at play here? Not what does this mean about me? That question is a trap. It collapses a complex external situation into a personal verdict about your worth, your adequacy, your trajectory. It turns data into judgment. What variables are at play keeps you in the analytical frame. It treats the situation as a system to understand rather than a mirror to fear. This is where cold intelligence actually starts forming, not in the big strategic moves. Right here in this micro moment, in the gap between event and interpretation, where most people automatically collapse and where the trained mind chooses to stand and look. When you decouple consistently, you stop being at the mercy of your own narrative machine. You start seeing situations with the clarity of someone who was never tangled in the story in the first place. And that clarity is worth more than almost any other mental asset you can build. Number 3, outcome layering. There is a specific kind of intelligence that separates the people who shape outcomes from the people who just react to them. It is not IQ. It is not talent. It is not even experience in the conventional sense. It is the ability to run time forward, to take a single decision point and follow it, not just to what happens next, but to what that creates, and then what that creates after that. 3 layers minimum, sometimes 5, sometimes even more. The average mind lives in layer 1. Something happens, they respond. The response is driven by what feels right, what feels satisfying, what relieves the immediate pressure of the moment. Layer 1 thinking is the default. And the problem with defaults is that they are built for average situations, not for the situations that actually determine the direction of your life. Outcome layering is the deliberate habit of running the stack before you move. Layer 1. what happens immediately after I make this move? Layer 2, what does that create in the short window that follows? Layer 3, what pattern does this establish, and what does that pattern attract or repel over time? The third layer is where almost everyone is blind, because the third layer does not feel connected to the decision in the moment. The chain of causation is too long for instinct to trace, but it is real and it is ruthless. The decision you make in a moment of emotional pressure is not just that moment. It is a signal. It is a pattern. It is a precedent your nervous system sets, and a precedent the world around you records. Layer 3 is where you pay for layer 1 shortcuts, sometimes months later, sometimes years later, in ways that feel completely unrelated, but are not. Here is the training. Before any decision made under emotional pressure, run this sequence silently in your mind. If I do this, what happens next? And then after that, what happens? And then after that, what happens? It takes 30 seconds. It costs you nothing, and it catches the decisions that feel right in layer 1, but destroys something in layer 3 before you ever make them. The strategic delay, the pause, the wait, the refusal to rush is not hesitation. Do not let anyone sell you the idea that moving fast is always strength. Moving fast under emotional pressure is how brilliant people make catastrophic choices. Strategic delay is a weapon. It gives you time to run the stack. It forces the situation to develop further, which always reveals more information, and it signals something to everyone watching. This person does not move from impulse. That signal alone changes how people approach you. Machiavelli once said, "Whosoever desires constant success must change his conduct with the times." The operative word is desire, not react, not stumble into. Desire, intent, design. You cannot design your outcomes if you are just reacting to each moment. Outcome layering is how you move from reaction to design. Cold intelligence thinks in time layers, not moments. The person who can hold discomfort long enough to see the third layer will almost always navigate better than the person who moved on impulse in the first. Number 4, stop hearing words, start seeing architecture. Most people just listen. They process what is said. They respond to the content of what lands in front of them. And they miss almost everything that actually matters. Because beneath every interaction, beneath every conversation, every tension, every sudden shift in energy, there is a structure, a set of forces that nobody names but everyone is feeling. Incentives, hierarchy, fear, ambition, scarcity, timing, history, leverage. These forces shape everything that happens on the surface. The words are just the waves. The structure is the ocean floor. Structural perception is the trained ability to see the floor while others are just watching the waves. When someone challenges you, when someone suddenly shifts their position, when someone who was warm becomes cold, when an agreement dissolves unexpectedly, the untrained mind asks, "What did I do?" It turns inward. It searches for personal fault. It makes the situation all about emotion. The structurally trained mind asks what changed in the system, what shifted in their incentives, what threat appeared, what new information did they receive that rearranged their calculation. Where does this moment sit inside the larger geometry of what they are protecting or pursuing? These are not cynical questions. They are precise ones. They see people not as irrational, but as rational agents operating under forces that are often invisible even to themselves. Understanding those forces does not make you manipulative. It makes you accurate. Here is what structural perception actually feels like once it is built. You walk into a room and you read positions, not faces. Who has something to prove here? Who is operating from scarcity? Who holds leverage that they have not shown yet? Who is performing confidence to cover fear? The content of the conversation becomes secondary, almost like subtitles in a language you already understand, running below the real information you are absorbing. You stop being surprised by shifts because you were watching the incentives, not the friendship. You stop being destabilized by provocations because you can see what they are attached to and what they are actually asking for underneath the surface challenge. Train this in every significant interaction. Run 3 questions before you respond to content. What does this person need to protect right now? What do they need to gain? What am I representing to them in this moment? A resource, a threat, an ally, or an obstacle? Answer those 3 questions, and the content of what they say becomes a map, not a maze. You know where you are. You know what is actually being negotiated, and you can respond to the real thing, not just the visible surface of it. Appear calm, study structure, move strategically. Number 5, the 72-hour neutrality drill. For 72 hours, you apply one rule to every emotionally charged decision: it waits. Anything that feels like it must be resolved right now, it waits. Anything that produces a surge of urgency in your chest, it waits. Anything your reactive mind labels as a crisis, it waits for at least a beat, a breath, a deliberate pause before you move. You are not checking out, you are not avoiding, you are running a test. The test question is this: is this urgency real, or is it manufactured by my emotional state? Real urgency is external and objective. A building is on fire, someone is in danger. Time-sensitive action is required by forces outside your nervous system. That is real urgency. Respond to it. But most of what your mind labels as urgent is not that. Most of it is emotional pressure masquerading as time pressure. The need to respond immediately because not responding feels intolerable. The drive to resolve something now because sitting with uncertainty is uncomfortable. The impulse to act because action feels like control even when it is not. That is manufactured urgency. And manufactured urgency is how reactive minds get played. During the 72 hours, the second layer of the drill is observation without suppression. This is the part most people misunderstand. You are not trying to feel nothing. You are not trying to push the emotion down, flatten it, or perform detachment. When the emotional charge arrives, let it arrive. Feel it. Notice exactly where it lands in your body. Notice the thought that follows it. Notice the story your mind wants to attach to it. And then do not obey it. Observation without obedience. That distinction is everything. You are not the emotion. You are the thing behind the emotion, watching it move through. When you practice standing in that observer position, receiving the signal without immediately translating it into behavior, something in the architecture of your mind begins to shift. The emotion stops feeling like a command. It starts feeling like data. And data can be evaluated, weighed, set aside, used when relevant, discarded when not. Machiavelli once said, "It is double pleasure to deceive the deceiver." The first deceiver in your life is not someone external. It is your own reactive mind. The part that convinces you that urgency is real, that the immediate response is the necessary one, that your first interpretation is the accurate one. When you learn to see through that, when you can watch your own reactions without being governed by them, you have outmaneuvered the most fundamental deceiver you will ever face. After 72 hours, most people report the same thing. Not that the emotions disappeared, but that the automatic translation from emotion to behavior, the pipeline that used to run without consultation, has developed a valve, a pause point, a place where you can intervene. That valve is emotional non-obedience. And once it is installed, it does not leave. Number 6, strategic leverage architecture. Now we talk about the outer game. You have been building internal infrastructure. Now let us talk about how that infrastructure moves in the world. Most people apply force to problems, direct linear frontal force. They see resistance, they push, they see a blocked path, they push harder, they see a conflict, they enter it head on. This is intuitive. It is also almost always inefficient. Force meets counterforce. The harder you push, the more organized the resistance becomes. And if the resistance is structural, if the problem is not a surface obstacle, but a deep embedded dynamic, no amount of direct force will ever resolve it. You will just exhaust yourself pressing against something that simply reforms behind the pressure. Strategic leverage architecture is the practice of changing the game entirely. Instead of attacking the visible problem, you locate the structural point beneath it. The place where minimal input produces maximum shift. The angle where the system's own geometry works in your favor. The node in the network where one well-placed move changes the conditions for everything else. Every situation has these nodes. Most people never find them because they are too busy pushing on the surface. Here is how to start seeing them. When you face resistance of any kind, stop. Do not push yet. Ask, what is this resistance protecting? Because resistance is almost never random. It exists because something underneath the surface is threatened by what you are trying to do. Something needs to remain stable, remain safe, remain in its current position. Identify that thing. Once you see what the resistance is protecting, you have the actual problem in your hands, not the symptom. And often the actual problem is solvable without confronting the resistance directly at all. You address what the resistance is protecting, and the resistance, having lost its purpose, dissolves on its own. This is the minimal input, disproportionate output principle. It is not about doing less. It is about doing the right thing in the right place. The craftsman does not carve stone by smashing it. He finds the grain and follows it. The structure does the work. You just apply force where the structure is already asking for it. Machiavellian cold intelligence operates here, not in dramatic confrontations, not in shows of force, but in the quiet, precise identification of the angle that makes force unnecessary. This is not passivity. This is not avoidance. This is intelligence applied at the structural level rather than the surface level. And the results when you operate this way are consistently disproportionate to the visible effort, which is exactly how it should look to anyone watching. Number 7, the psychological trade-off. Now we get to the part that most people skip, the part that separates the people who actually walk through this transformation from the ones who understand it intellectually and then quietly step back into the familiar. When you build what we have talked about in this video, something changes in you that is not entirely comfortable, and you need to know about it before it arrives, not after. Here is what actually happens. Your perception accelerates. You start reading situations at a layer most people around you cannot access. The structural dynamics become visible. The manufactured urgency in other people's communication becomes obvious. The automatic narratives that drive most human behavior, narratives that people are running completely unconsciously, you can see them clearly. And there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with that seeing, not the loneliness of being unloved or unwanted. The loneliness of being in a room where you are processing at a depth that nobody else in the room is currently operating at, where you are running layer 3 analysis while the conversation is still on layer 1, where you can see 3 moves ahead in a situation that others are treating as having only 1 move. That gap between your perception and the perception of most people around you creates a kind of internal silence, a distance. It does not feel like superiority. It feels like translation difficulty, like being fluent in a language nobody else in the room speaks. This is cognitive isolation, and most frameworks on emotional intelligence do not talk about it because most frameworks on emotional intelligence are not actually building this depth. They are building expressiveness. Expression is social. What we are building is internal, and internal development has a cost. It is solitary. There is more. When you stop performing emotion for social approval, when you stop reacting visibly so that people feel validated in reading you, some people will feel unsettled by the new version of you, not because you have become cold or unkind, but because you have become less legible, and humans are deeply uncomfortable with what they cannot read. Some relationships restructure, some dissolve. The ones built on your predictability, your reactivity, your old patterns, those may not survive the upgrade. And that is a real loss, not a theoretical one. But here is the reframe, and this one matters. The cognitive isolation is not permanent. It is the gap between versions, the bridge between who you were operating as and who you are training to become. On this bridge, everything feels unfamiliar because it is. You have left one room and not yet fully arrived in the next. That in-between space is uncomfortable by definition. It is not a signal that you are going in the wrong direction. It is the signal that you are actually going somewhere. When the new architecture stabilizes, when compression, decoupling, outcome layering, and structural perception become wired rather than effortful, the isolation resolves not by becoming less perceptive, but by finding your level, by gravitating toward people who operate at this depth, toward situations where this architecture is an advantage rather than a gap. Isolation is not loss. It is transition. Walk through it. If this struck something real in you, if you felt that shift while watching, do not ignore it. The gap between where you are and where you could be is not talent. It is not timing. It is not luck. It is whether you are governing your mind or whether your mind is governing you. You already know which one you are choosing.